Welcome to the presentation. My name is Ellie. I'm one of the clinicians at Gainesville Community Counseling Center. Today we're going to talk about how to recognize and establish your own healthy boundaries. I encourage that anyone that has a link to this presentation, please spread this word. Please share the link with as many people as you can. We want to get this information out to the public because honestly, a lot of us don't know what boundaries are even or how to set them and communicate them. But let's look into what we're going to cover today. So here's the table of contents. First, we're going to talk about what are the consequences of unhealthy boundaries and the characteristics of them. We're also going to take a look at how to identify boundaries and being able to define your own personal boundaries. Also, how to communicate them effectively with other people in verbal and nonverbal ways. And also how to enact your boundaries when they have not been respected or they have been pushed. So really quick, my name is Ellie again. I was born in Cuba and I was raised in Miami. I use she, her pronouns. If anyone is interested in working with me, an individual, here are the populations that I work with and also the clinical issues. Typically, I am working from an existential framework for my cases, but I do incorporate a lot of cognitive behavioral, dialectical behavioral therapy, EMDR, and Gottman method. A lot of my clients like to tell me that they appreciate my no-nonsense approach. Some people have actually said like there's just no BSing in this room because I very quickly will pick up on it. But yeah, it's a fun time if you appreciate a direct communication style, which is mine. So here are some of the consequences of having unhealthy boundaries. You might be able to tell that you have unhealthy boundaries based on these things. First of all, boundaries does not just refer to talking to other people, not just in relation to other people, but also just in relation to your own physiological and psychological needs. So when we are not recognizing our boundaries, it ends up increasing the amount of stress that our body is in. The whole point of having a boundary is to help your body feel like it is safe, feel like it can grow, it can learn, it can do all of these things. Anytime that one of our bodies and mind, our needs are not met, we are resulting in stress or adrenaline. It's like our survival instincts just turn on. We're like in survival mode, basically, when we don't have healthy boundaries. But we're like that all the time. In the short term, it might look like something happening, someone doing something or saying something, and you might have this like sudden response to it where maybe you get very agitated with them and you start arguing with them or fighting them. You might just feel like you really need to get the hell out of the room and you want to leave the conversation altogether or something. You want to stay away from this person. You might end up just freezing and being stuck there, not knowing what to say or do. Or you could have a fawn response, which a lot of people don't know what this is. It tends to happen whenever we are faced with a threat from another person. And in order to keep ourselves safe and protect ourselves, we end up trying to please the person who has threatened us. So this happens a lot in domestic violence cases, by the way. Women who have been repeatedly abused, or really anyone who's been repeatedly abused, might end up enacting this fawn response in order to keep their partner just happy and away from me, stop fighting me. So if you have to be in this state of stress for a long period of time, the human body is not meant to be in this survival mode all the time. It destroys the human body. That is supposed to be reserved for meeting a wild animal out in the field and knowing what to do in those situations. That's what that instinctual response is for. But if we have to be in that state for a longer period of time, it can lead us to a period of burnout or a depressive episode. because the body can only take so much. You can only hang on for so long. This could lead to a short-term decrease in your motivation or your concentration, make you a little bit more irritable and snappy with people, a little bit more impatient. It can mean that you're like dragging yourself out of bed in the morning during these periods of time. Especially, let's say, like if you're in school, you got midterms, you got finals, or you're at work and there's just been a really hectic amount of work lately. It can lead you to feeling burnout. Now, let's say that you have to have this exposure to stress for an even longer duration. Let's say that it's been years, and some of you might be thinking like, hang on, I've been in survival mode my whole fucking life. Like it can be years and years, right? So in the long-term toll, it will lower your self-esteem. It will increase your isolation from others. It will increase your depressive and anxious symptoms. It will impair your daily functioning, and it will impair your sleep. And it honestly just destroys you after a while. So this is why it's so important to learn how to set those boundaries and those limits where you can, because a lot of us have to feel this long-term stress over situations that we just can't control, unfortunately. So a last thing that I wanted to add on here is that if you are under stress, then you are going to have trouble empathizing with others. And I'm adding this for you helpers out there, and you empaths out there, and you people pleasers out there who come into my office and tell me, well, I can't set boundaries because they need my help. Everyone needs my help and I have to help everyone. Okay, well, listen, you're not actually helping. You're not actually caring. You're not actually loving, because your body is in this state of emotional chaos and it can't regulate itself. And that impairs your ability to think. Now, if your ability to think is impacted, then so is your ability to empathize. Because in order to empathize with another person, you have to be able to cognitively think about what it is that they're going through. What does this look like through that person's eyes in the context of their perspective? Okay? If you are not thinking about how that person is seeing things, their perspective, then what you are doing is projecting your own emotions that are amplified onto them and thinking that that's what they're feeling too. Right? If you have poor boundaries, you are likely not actually helping and caring for others. You are not actually being empathetic. All right, keep that in mind. I know you're out there. So I've been using this word boundaries a lot, and I think language really matters. Being able to define language really matters. And boundaries tends to be like a very popular way of summarizing this concept that I think it was like positive psychologists started using. But here's what the actual definition is. Right? Just the definition of a boundary in general. It's just anything that fixes a limit or an extent. That's it. It's just a line that indicates a limit. Here's a more psychological explanation of this. So your personal boundaries are limitations and guidelines that we have to set for ourselves. So it guides and limits our own behaviors, whereas a rule, let's say, might dictate the expectations for other people's behaviors. So if I'm here saying, well, you can't do this, that is now a rule, that is now a command. That is not a boundary, okay? A boundary is me speaking from my experience, me speaking from my limitations. So we're gonna get into that. But first, let's talk about what are the different types of boundaries that we have to set. So there can be physical, right? And that corresponds to any personal space or physical touch and the appropriateness of that physical closeness. And thinking about how in during the pandemic, people were supposed to maintain a 6-foot distance, which actually in the United States wasn't that big of a deal because most Americans grow up with this understanding that you have to respect other people's space and keep your hands to yourself. That is a cultural value in the United States. Now, if you live in Europe, no. In Europe, people usually are a lot more touchy with each other and very close with each other, and that's normal. That is a normal experience in that culture, in those cultures. I mean, um, so it can vary a lot, even though you would think it would be the most obvious. But even that can have some variations. There can also be some intellectual boundaries, right? So being able to respect your own thoughts and other people's thoughts, ideas, opinions, and the appropriate context and time for those discussions. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Like, you're probably not going to be talking about your childhood trauma with someone you just met, because you're just not that close. But we're going to come back to that one too. So I put the emotional and the sensory together because a lot of times people don't recognize that feelings isn't just emotions. Feelings is also the sensations in your body, and your emotions are showing up through sensations in your bodies. Some people might be able to better describe their feelings through explaining their heart rate or a feeling in their stomach or something like that, while other people would say, well, I'm nervous because my heart rate's so high. Or they'll just say, I don't know why I'm nervous. I just say I'm nervous. I don't even know why I know that. There's just so many different ways that someone can understand what they are feeling. And so being able to respect someone's boundaries on that is being able to respect those emotions and whatever sensations they're experiencing and the appropriateness of that disclosure, right? You might not want to tell people that you have a really bad stomach ache because you have to go to the bathroom really bad, right? You can just say, I have a stomach ache. You don't gotta go that far. Also, you don't got to hold on to that information either. If your stomach really hurts and you're having a trouble concentrating because of that, you might want to speak up and talk about that and tell someone so that you can go take care of yourself. There's also the domain of sexual boundaries. So that's just being able to respect and understand mutual consent in any sexual experience, mutual desire, and also mutual limitations to a sexual experience. And there's also respect for the material. The material might also be more observable and kind of obvious, though not always. Not always. You would want to be able to respect another person's possessions, another person's objects, right? Not taking out anger on those objects, or not just like selling those objects, right? Being able to respect that those are another person's things and belongings, and also the appropriateness of sharing those material goods, like being able to share your money with someone and maybe return that money at some point. Those are the material types of boundaries you might have to set. And then there's also the respect for your time, any various uses of time, and the appropriateness of its distribution. Like, for example, being able to set a limit even within yourself of saying, oh, I have to take a break from my studying. Let me make sure I only take like a 15-minute break, and then I'll make sure I come back and do my work. Right? So that's how you can set limits around those times within yourself, even not just with other people. So here are some different ways that people might try to either set boundaries or not set them. There's different styles, and these are related a lot to attachment styles. And if you know anything about those attachment styles, you will know how important it is to address any of the unhealthy attachments in order to improve your relationships. But here's one of the ways you might be able to do that instead of looking through the boundary styles. So first, let's talk about the porous. So the porous, I like to say this is for those of you that consider yourself helpers, and anyone else, honestly. It's anyone that has this sense of trusting other people a lot and a little bit too much, and sharing information inappropriately, like not really knowing how to moderate, like not sharing that much information, having a hard time saying no to others. I hear this a lot from people who consider themselves people pleasers. It's having a lot of trouble saying no. Um, and a lot of times they're having trouble saying no because they're trying to also avoid rejection through compliance, right? So I can't say no because if I say no, you're going to reject me. Being overly involved in other people's problems, meaning like feeling like you have to be a part of the solution, even if it's not your problem at all, and then doesn't really affect you. Um, Being very dependent on other people's opinions of you or of anything in your life. Like being so dependent on them that, let's say, you might really, really rely on asking other people for help with things or asking other people what they think about something, things like that. Now, that wouldn't be a healthier way of asking for help. It would be more like implying that you need help. Because another piece of this porous boundary style is that you use a lot of passive and indirect communication. So a person with a passive and indirect communication might try to get other people to help by implying a difficulty rather than outright saying, I need help with this. But still really wanting other people to help, right? And people with porous boundary styles tend to really be able to pick up on when other people need help and what other people need from them. So they tend to also assume that other people are going to be able to guess what their needs are. They also tend to not assert their own personal values or preferences. So a lot of times when a person with porous boundary styles gets something pushed, gets something disrespected, right? They try to explain a thought or an emotion or something like that, and someone else says, well, you're wrong, or that's actually your fault. I can't help you with that because that's your fault, right? They imply those things in reaction. The person with porous boundary styles may end up just complying and absorbing that information rather than just asserting, no, it's okay for me to do this, or no, I prefer to do this instead. Now, a lot of times people with porous boundary styles are also in relation in some type of way with someone that has rigid boundary styles. So rigid boundary styles, it's almost like a polar opposite of porous sometimes. Think of it as they just have this impenetrable limit on themselves where they keep other people at a certain distance. They don't trust anyone. No one is to be trusted. They will be very guarded with their personal information, so they won't share personal information, almost none at all. They will usually say no thank you to someone if someone asks them for help with something or they ask them to do something, unless it's, of course, their own responsibility. A lot of people with rigid boundaries know what to do at work. For example, they know that, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, so that's what I'm going to do. But let's say someone at work says, oh, I'm really struggling with this, can you help? They might be like, no, I don't really want to deal with that. They feel typically very unattached from other people's problems. So when they're unattached from other people's problem, it doesn't necessarily mean they don't care about other people's like well-being. It may just mean that they really don't care about trying to figure out how to fix it or how to solve the problems. They tend to ignore other people's opinions of them, usually because they assume that those opinions are going to be wrong or they're going to be judgmental. And to avoid rejection, they will push other people away. So they'll fight, they'll argue, they'll get very irritable with people. They will not ask for help with anything. They are absolutely only here for them, only going to figure this out themselves. They can't ask for help in collaboration to solve something together. They can be very inflexible with their personal values and their own perspective. A lot of times when you're interacting with a person with rigid boundaries, it may be really hard to change their mind about something because they will very quickly push back on it or argue against it. So these people may have more of an aggressive communication style. Now, an aggressive communication style, it is going on the offense when you're trying to communicate. Basically, it means that you might criticize other people, you might use very blunt language, you might use very hurtful language in order to push the other person away. That's the intention of the aggressive communication. A lot of people with both of these styles aren't aware that they're doing these things, right? So there's not that much intentionality behind their behaviors. They're not always fully aware of how they're coming across to others. So what but everyone needs is more of an education so that you can attain more of a healthy boundary style. So a healthy boundary style means that you're able to be more selective about who it is that you're going to be close with. Meaning you're able to kind of feel people out and observe them in environments and in relationship with yourself, with other people. And kind of like gander and determine, is this really someone that I want to continue having a relationship with? Or am I able to maybe distance myself a little bit? Right. So a person with porous boundaries would not really be able to determine like if someone is someone to be close to or not. A person with rigid boundaries doesn't want to be close to anyone, first of all. And also if they see some kind of behaviors that they find offensive or untrustworthy, they might just immediately cut that thing off and like never talk to that person again and completely avoid that person forever. Right? That's what a rigid boundary does. Whereas a porous boundary might get sucked into that with them and stick around with someone who could potentially lead them down to some dangerous behaviors sometimes. Now, when you have a healthier set of boundaries, you're able to respect other people, but still decide, I'm not going to share this with this person. Or be able to decide, okay, this is not a person that I can be maybe emotionally intimate with, but maybe I can still have a working relationship with them. Maybe this is someone that, I just don't share things with, or I don't say certain things around, but, I can still hang out with and have fun with. So that's what it means to be more selective, being able to decide what kind of relationship you want to have with each individual that you're coming across. So people with healthier boundaries are able to build trust over time with others. So they don't overshare information too quickly and they're not overly guarded. They will share information as needed, basically as needed. So you'll share that information appropriately. People with healthier boundaries are able to discern when they need to say no, when they need to say no. Meaning, yeah, I'll help, but I'm not past 5 o'clock because I need to leave and go home. That's what it means to have a more careful decision making around when you can or can't help. They will want to provide support, but they won't become engulfed in it. So they won't be overly involved in their problems, but they also won't be too distant and unattached from them. They'll be able to value their own opinion and that of others. So a person with a healthier boundary style might take a moment to think about what they think about a situation, think about their own opinion. And then once they've done that, maybe gone and asked for other people's opinions and see just to see like, okay, do you see what I see? Like, is this just me or right? Like just trying to gauge if this is something that they're misunderstanding or if someone else is also agreeing that's something that occurred. They'll also be able to accept that conflict and rejection are a normal part of life. Normal part of life. So people with porous and rigid boundaries are going to have a really hard time with rejection. Whereas a person with a healthier style might be able to accept that, sometimes we're just going to butt heads and we can figure it out. And if we don't figure it out, then, good luck to you and we'll part ways. So that would be a more grounded and healthier way to respond. Another thing is that they can adapt their values, right? So they're not inflexible with their values, and they also don't just openly betray their own values. They tend to have a clear understanding of their own values and be flexible with the situations and the people that are in them, that they're interacting with. And they will use an assertive communication style. So an assertive communication style is very direct, is easy to understand, it's specific. It is not going to the offensive. It does not imply. It says what you mean to say exactly as you mean to say it without offending directly and without implying a meaning behind it. Okay, that's what a direct communication style would be more like. Now, think of these boundary styles. First of all, the way that you see yourself acting across your different human relationships, that is probably more indicative of your attachment style. There are some relationships where you need to maintain a certain degree of different styles. Okay. So typically, let's say that you are working in a field or career that has a lot of competition with other people. Typically, people who are working in that kind of career field probably going to have more of a rigid boundary style at work. That doesn't mean that that's how it's going to carry itself out at home in a romantic partnership, for example, or in a familiar relationship. But at work, they're going to have to maintain that type of style because that's what the environment calls for. Whereas a person who has, let's say, somewhat healthy boundaries and they end up in a relationship with someone who has maybe more unhealthy boundaries, they may end up swinging towards more porous boundaries in that relationship, but in every other relationship might have a healthier boundary style. So sometimes these styles are in reaction to the environment and to the other person that you're interacting with. But overall, we want to try to work towards improving our styles into a healthier method. So now this is not changing who you are, right? This is not changing who you are. You still have your values. You still have your own opinions. You still have your own morals. You still have the things that make up who you are. These are just the ways that you end up communicating who you are. So that can change. The way that you communicate who you are, the way you come across to other people, the way you show up to the space. Those are things that are very much capable of changing over time and with intentionality. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the factors that really influence how you will define your boundaries. Okay. Some of these things will make it so that the boundaries between two different people are very ambiguous and difficult to predict. Okay. So some of those things that can influence your boundaries is just your personality, just like your temperament, your usual difficulties in your life, the things that you really like, the things you really hate, your communication style, right? If you have a direct communication style, an indirect communication style, any adverse events that have happened in your life, so any traumatic events as well, any cultural discrimination or marginalization identities, any awareness of boundaries, right? You kind of have to have an awareness of a limitation that needs to be set in order for you to be able to set one, right? Maybe your religion and your spirituality tells you how you're supposed to be acting. your race, your ethnicity, your family of origin, your gender expression, your sexuality. So really all the things, all the factors that can really influence how you show up in the world will define your boundaries. So why do I bring this up right now? Because that seems pretty obvious, right? Because so many of these are determined by an individual's experience in their lives. That means that sometimes there are going to be boundaries that are very obvious between two people that have a lot of similarities. Like, let's say if you're from the same racial and cultural backgrounds, like you grew up in the same types of neighborhoods, probably there's going to be a lot of boundaries that are obvious to you because you're in the same kind of environment. There may still be some internal boundaries that you're not aware of, but generally, the more similar you are, the easier it is for you to predict what another person's boundaries are going to be, because those are so often determined by cultural values that we just learn over time and in our experiences in the world. Really, the people that are going to be the most efficient in predicting your boundaries are the people that you grew up with, just your family members, because within your own family, you typically have your own familial culture, and that's where you really learn a lot of boundaries. Um, but most people, even the people in your own family, have had different walks in their life. They've had different experiences in the world. So everyone has their own individual boundaries because of that. So that's why we really want to be very direct when we try to communicate these boundaries, because another person may not be able to pick up on your desire and intention to set a boundary if you are not using very specific language around them. So first, let's talk about how you're going to identify these things, because this is really abstract. This is such an abstract concept, and it's so hard to really notice when there's some limitation that you need to set on yourself. It requires a lot of mindfulness. But I have a little exercise that we can do here to kind of help you visualize and use this metaphor when you're trying to determine if you have a boundary that needs to be set. Excuse me, I need to drink some water. Okay. So first of all, let's say that this house just kind of represents your experiences in the world. Okay. Let's say that the house itself is kind of like your comfort zone. So inside this comfort zone, you feel completely at ease. You feel completely comfortable, like you have so much more control over this area than any other area in the world, right? So your own domain, your own home. Some of us might have bigger houses than others. Some of us might not have a house at all and only experience a comfort zone internally because of the environment we grew up in. But the point is that this is a safe space. This is the absolute most safe place that you could be in it, and so safe that you are nice and relaxed and chill. And you can sleep, put your feet up, whatever it is. Now, the thing is that if we're always in our comfort zone, probably going to get pretty boring. You don't want to really see the same thing every day over and over and over and over again. You don't really want to stay within that comfort zone because it gets lonely in there. Now, you're going to want to walk out of that door and step outside and maybe take a look around, right? Smell the air, feel the wind, see some new things, some pretty trees, plant some seeds, grow some flowers, tend to a garden, right? This is the area where you're not as comfortable in the comfort zone. So you're still kind of exposed out in the world, but you are also feeling like you are enjoying the view, you're enjoying the experience to some extent, despite any kind of discomfortability. I like to call this area the growth area. Right, so this is an area where we might experience some vulnerability. We might be able to experience connection with humanity, with nature. So there's an area where we can have a lot of connection, and it can feel like you have to be a little brave sometimes to in order to grow. But there should always be a limit to that bravery and that courage that you have. Okay? Because once you get out into that yard and you come up to that sidewalk, you are now approaching the boundary line of the sidewalk, right? On the other side of that, well, there's a boundary limit. On the other side of that is the road, the street, where a lot of cars come by. And that's what I call the danger zone. So the danger zone is the space and the place where we are at once we have crossed a boundary or a limit. So this is the place where we start to feel a lot of stress. And I mean, if you think about it, if you're out in the street, you're probably not going to be thinking about, oh my gosh, look how pretty the trees are and look how nice the weather is. You're not going to be thinking, you're going to be thinking, how the heck do I get out of the way in time to dodge these cars? You're in survival mode. Okay. So what we're going to try to do here is try to figure out how you can keep yourself from going over that boundary and that limit. And listen, some of us might have a very big comfort zone. Some of us might have a very big growth area. And some of us might have that boundary line and that limit right up against that comfort zone. Okay. Because you've just always had to live with so much danger in your life, so many things that have been adverse and have been stressful. In order to be able to expand your comfortability within your life and be able to grow and feel more stable, you have to remain within the boundary lines that you can remain within. A lot of these things, we are pushed outside of our boundary because of oppression, because of financial difficulties, mental illnesses. All of those things make it so much harder in order for us to remain within our boundary lines. But we have to try to figure out what are the areas, what are the types of boundaries, like we talked about earlier, about the different domains, physical, material, whatever it is, that we can establish and that we can maintain, that we do have some control over in order for us to prevent further harm to our bodies and also be able to grow and be able to enjoy our lives again. Okay? So, first of all, we're going to have to work on claiming that which is ours and not yours. Our baggage claim. So we want to identify what is our personal baggage, what is our personal stuff that we have to deal with. You know, you have to be able to distinguish between your own personal opinion and that of others, and what you truly value and what other people value. You want to be able to write your own story, write your movie as if you are the protagonist from your perspective, not from others. It really requires you to address some internalized shame or judgment, because that's going to get in the way of you recognizing your limit. If you feel too embarrassed to admit that you have a limit, you're not going to be able to recognize when you have to set that limit. Makes sense? Now, you want to also be able to define your personal limits of each boundary type. So the physical, intellectual, emotional, sexual, material, and time. And that might happen over the course of time, right? They might be easier, let's say, if you're just starting to work on your boundaries, it might be easier to practice doing that with other people. Or it might actually be easier for you to set boundaries within yourself as it relates to how much you're spending or how much time you're taking up or wasting. Okay. You want to be able to improve your awareness of your own emotional, bodily, and cognitive reactions. So sometimes, honestly, sometimes I have no idea that I have a boundary until I'm suddenly like really irritated for no reason, and I get kind of sarcastic. That's when I'm like, oh yeah, there's something here. There's something here that I'm not addressing that I need to think about. Sometimes it's just easier to tell when you have to set a boundary after you've already crossed it. um, Having crossed your own boundaries would require you to recognize your own bodily sensations, right? So it requires you to build that habit of noticing how you're reacting to your situations in your life. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to set them because you're never going to be able to have awareness that they're there. So, some things that might be limiting your ability to even gain an awareness of these boundaries and limitations is having an exposure to a person who is constantly just invalidating or violating the limitations that you have set by on your own or that other people have set on you. Okay, so if someone's constantly criticizing you for not wanting to spend more time on something or not giving over your money or not wanting to have sex or not wanting to talk about your feelings, right? So if you constantly have someone that is pushing and invalidating and telling you you're wrong because of that, you're a terrible person because of this, you have to change this because that is a push on your boundaries. That is going to limit your ability to become more aware of your own personal values and your own reactions because you're going to be so focused on that other person's hurtful comments or actions. Okay, so another thing that might be limiting you is not having the language for it. Because nobody in my childhood told me, oh, you have to set limitations with other. No one. No one. No one talks like this, right? No one really understands these concepts. They don't have the words to explain them and identify them. Sometimes, like I said earlier, language really matters. So you want to have the emotional vocabulary to be able to recognize your emotions. You want to have the language of understanding bodily sensations. Oh, I feel really tense in my arm, or I feel very relaxed in my stomach. Okay, so being able to identify bodily sensations is really important. And also being able to catch yourself having negative thoughts. And those are really hard, especially for those of us that have some very quick thinking. Some negative thoughts might happen so quickly that you're not even aware that they're happening. It might almost feel like unconscious sometimes. And having any traumatic responses to a situation can also block your awareness. So anytime that someone is dissociating, right? Dissociation is anytime that you're out of touch with reality. Like you're almost like removed and disconnected from your own body, your own mind, your own heart. And you can kind of feel like you're numb and you're just wading through life. You're not sure what you're doing or what you're feeling or what you're experiencing. That would be an example of a traumatic response that might block your awareness of the boundary. Um, and here's some tips for improving this awareness. Improve your mindfulness skills. Mindfulness is not just sitting down with a mindfulness app and trying to meditate. That's not what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is behaving and walking through the world with a very intentional understanding of the things that you're noticing. So, very intentionally trying to observe your reality, observe your internal dialogue while you're experiencing it. That's what mindfulness is. So, you could do that anywhere. You could mindfully fold your laundry, you could mindfully wash your dishes. As long as you're very focused on what you are doing and what is happening in your environment, you're being mindful. That is a skill. That is a skill that needs to be developed over time with a lot of practice. So I recommend you go to therapy because in therapy, you're going to get a chance to process what you're trying to improve on. You're going to get a chance to, over time, improve on those skills and have someone who is going to corroborate your progress and going to be able to make sure you're guided into the progress you're actually trying to make rather than getting sidetracked by somebody else's agenda. And also keep looking for more psychoeducation because, like I said, this is just introductory. You're gonna need more than just this presentation. So now the part that probably all of you actually came here for. How to actually effectively communicate some boundaries. Excuse me. So I recommend that you plan ahead when you're first starting out. Plan ahead for how you're going to establish a boundary. That means you're going to process and you're going to understand your reactions. If you need to reflect on it in a journal, or maybe talk about it with an unbiased third person that you trust, right? Like someone that isn't affected by whatever it is that happened or whatever it is you're trying to set a boundary around. Plan to communicate in a calm moment if possible. You're going to want to invite an individual to have a conversation, to coordinate, to collaborate, to talk, right? Hey, honey, we need to talk tonight. Yeah, okay. I know that phrase has been ridiculed a lot by the media, but it actually is something to use. It's actually something you want to use. You want to give people heads up, like, hey, we have to have a pretty difficult conversation sometime soon. When are you able to? Okay, so when possible, if possible, you want to plan ahead as much as possible and wait for there to be a calm moment where both people are ready to listen and talk, rather than get agitated because they're hungry or get really irritable because they haven't slept. Just food for thought. So now you're going to also want to figure out what language you're going to use. And so here's a very quick and brief explanation of how to use more direct and assertive language. So you're going to use I statements or we statements. You're going to use more respectful language. So that means probably no cussing, probably no criticisms about the person. You're going to be very clear in your language. In some settings, you could use indirect language. So you can use more of a like implied thing in a certain setting where you know that the other person is going to catch on to what you're trying to tell them, right? Like you know that at work it might be enough to just say, "Oh, I'm real busy today," like so that you can just indirectly say no to someone's request. But in other situations, that might not work because the other person will be like, "You don't care about me," right? In a personal relationship. So you might require more direct wording in those settings. You want to state the boundary line with a specific marker. So you want to say the specific time limit, the specific behavior, the specific thing that you cannot do. Okay? The specific thing, I cannot do this. I cannot move past this limit. Okay? And then, if necessary and appropriate, you can compromise. So that is going to be up to your discretion, depending on the relationship, the context, whatever it is you're trying to address. You want to consider your own needs and the needs of another person or a system, right? And that doesn't mean you disregard your needs. No, you consider their needs, and then you try to find some kind of collaboration or suitable solution for both parties. Right? You don't want to completely just be like, well, there's no point in even telling my boss that I don't want to stay at work past 5 because we really need to just get that work done. And right, okay, but you could have a conversation about it, and there could be some flexibility so that you can at least reduce the amount of time that you have to be there if you can't bring it down to the actual boundary you're trying to set. You also want to refrain from any dishonest statements. You don't want to agree to things that you do not actually plan on doing. You don't want to agree that you're going to be totally fine with someone continuing to cross a boundary despite your attempts to explain it. If you if your compromise that you've come to together ends up not being a compromise that you can actually feel more safe in, right? Not comfortable, safe. Remember, we talked about that danger zone and the growth area. If you can at least be safe but a little uncomfortable, okay, cool. But if the boundary that you've agreed to in this compromise is actually going to be still in that danger zone, you're still on the edge of that sidewalk, maybe not. Maybe not. Okay. Don't agree to it. The last thing that I would recommend that you do is that, I don't know if you can see it. Non-verbal signals. Okay, so this is more of a indirect way with body language, very clear body language that might be able to help you set a boundary, right? It might be able to signal to the other person what you're about to communicate to them verbally. If they don't get it the first time, right? So you want to consider the type of relationship or the context and the setting. I know a lot of women can really relate to this strategy, right? Of maybe someone's trying to come up to you and flirt with you, and maybe you use some nonverbals to try to like signal I'm not interested. Maybe you just kind of like look away, or you avoid smiling at them. And if they still don't get it, you're probably gonna then be like, oh, I gotta go, I gotta leave. So nonverbal signals can be pretty indirect, but they can also help support whatever statement you are making because it gives them a heads up that you're about to set some kind of boundary. So you can use some open gestures like open arms or arms by your side, right? You can try to use open gestures when you're setting a boundary with someone, especially if it's someone that you're in a personal relationship with. Use it appropriately, right? You want to use open body language to show that you're not trying to attack them, you're not trying to be aggressive about something. But I do suggest that you sometimes use gestures that can imitate a boundary. So something that I tend to use a lot of is this kind of thing when I feel really uncomfortable. It's like I'm like straight up creating a boundary with my arms to signal to you, do not push, do not come past this point. So that can be another strategy that you could use. If you're going to have a communication with someone that you're close to or something about something that needs to be talked about for a longer period of time, you want to initiate with as calm of a tone as possible. You want to maintain an appropriate level of distance for the context in the relationship. Provide appropriate eye contact. So appropriate eye contact does not necessarily mean that you have to maintain eye contact at all times, right? Of course, you want to look away sometimes, you want to look sometimes. Also think about whether that person's going to find it disrespectful or not. So for some people, if you're looking me in the eye, then you're asking for trouble, you're asking to get hit, and that's a threat. For other people, if you're not looking me in the eye, then you are probably rolling your eyes at me and you're disrespecting me. So, right, read the person, think about, are they going to appreciate eye contact or not? Usually, if we're setting a boundary with a person, you've already kind of picked up on whether they prefer you to maintain eye contact or not. Okay. And also maintain a respectful listening. That's the hardest piece. That's a different presentation. But you want to try to be able to receive what they are saying in response without attacking or arguing, right? If you're trying to set a boundary and they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that, and they go off to like kind of like defend or justify or something like that in whichever capacity, you can very briefly just say, listen, I'm not upset with you. I'm hearing what you're saying, right? You can look at them in the eye, give them some signals to say like, yes, right? Nodding along or giving them some kind of nonverbal indication that you're paying attention to what they're saying. Okay. Now, let's say that you have done all that work. You did all that work. You got really good at your mindfulness. You got really good at noticing when you are stressed out and what it was that caused you to feel so stressed out. And you've been really working hard at noticing your feelings and your body sensations and your negative thoughts and all of those things. Whew, which, by the way, is a lot of work. And then you also worked on learning how to communicate effectively, right? You did all that work. You could be absolutely perfect at communicating your boundaries, and it would still not ensure that other people would respect them. So, unfortunately, there are times where just communicating them is not going to work because a lot of times people don't take boundaries as something respectful. A lot of times people have been taught not to have any boundaries with others and not to accept any boundaries with others. Um, so sometimes we have to enforce our boundaries rather than just communicating the boundaries. Okay. So, what to do when your boundaries are being pushed? Okay. So, anytime that someone is attempting to persuade you into compromising your boundaries, persuading is not the same as collaborating with you and trying to work it out together. Persuading you might look more like insisting that you give them more information, debating whether your perspective is rational or right, um, resurfacing any past issues or any past mistakes that you've made, or even like bringing up your own role in whatever it was, the dynamic, blaming you for having a limitation or implying that you're somehow inferior to them because this is some limitation that you are dealing with. Um, Even justifying or deflecting any time that they've previously violated this boundary, saying something like, well, you never said anything before. Why the hell are you saying this now? Okay, right? So those are pushes onto your boundaries, meaning like you're pushed to continue to communicate the boundary again, right? You have to reassert it. You may have already asserted it, right? You already tried to communicate it and assert it. And this person is now reacting in these ways. You're going to have to double down on those boundaries and restate the communication you tried to already say, right? So you want to refocus the conversation on the problem and your boundary, right? Don't get back into like who's to blame, who's at fault, or whatever. Don't start getting into an argument about it, right? You can totally say something very easily like, hey, I'm sure you have good intentions, or I'm not doubting your good intentions. I know you're a good person. I know you're a good person. I'm not trying to say you're not a good person. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm not trying to criticize you. I'm not trying to judge you. I'm just trying to communicate my limit. And I'm just trying to tell you what I need. Something like that. So you want to reaffirm your boundary after you've just kind of disengaged from any arguments. I'm sure you have good intentions. However, I need blank, or I'm just trying to solve this problem and asking you to help me solve a problem. I'm not able to do that. If my boundary is not respected, I'm not going to be able to continue this conversation, right? So you want to kind of give them a heads up of like, please stop budging, please I'm pushing, or I don't appreciate that you're not listening to what I'm trying to communicate right now. Something along the lines of trying to bring them back to what you were initially bringing up. You may have to establish some kind of temporary boundary around the discussion of the topic. So you might have to say something around like something along the lines of, hey, let's just come back to this later because I feel like we're getting heated, or can I just take a break and just think about all of this before we continue. So the easiest way that you can tell if you are not done talking about a boundary and keeping and maintaining your boundary is if you are not enthusiastic about the results, right? If you're not enthusiastic, like, yes, this was a good conversation. Yes, we've come to a good understanding. You're enthusiastic about that. If you're not enthusiastic, that is either a no or a maybe, right? So it's either, I don't think I'm really okay with this, or I think I'm gonna need some time to think about this. Let me just think about this and get back to you later. Okay, so those are some other ways. Essentially, you almost want to talk about this as if you're like an HR representative, but give it your own flavor and your own genuineness, of course. But it might be easiest to practice doing these things first in professional relationships, because those are the places where people are most likely to feel pressured to respect your boundaries. Okay. Now let's see what we should do if someone is continuing to pressure and push and violate your boundaries. Now, if this person starts to get aggressive with you, okay, they're not just getting heated, they're not just getting argumentative, they're straight up starting to threaten you, intimidate you, or make you feel like there's some kind of danger here if this person continues to push it. You're going to want to take steps to remove yourself from the situation. You want to determine how safe it will be to remove yourself from the situation given the circumstances, right? You want to use your body language to signal any discomfort or your intention to leave if appropriate, if it's safe. You can turn away, you can glance at your watch, you can look at your phone like you're real busy. Maybe make eye contact with people around you, with bystanders who are observing it, so that other people are on alert that you're feeling uncomfortable and that you're feeling disrespected. Try to find any appropriate method of removal, right? So like leaving the location, moving towards a more public area maybe, because most people feel very pressured to maintain those kinds of conversations private. Hanging up a phone call or blocking a phone number, changing the locks on the door, things like that. You want to inform the person that you will need to remove yourself if it's safe to inform them, right? In some situations, telling them, hey, I'm no longer going to be able to continue talking to you right now might not be safe. It might just be safer for you to get the hell out. Right? I'm just, it's a very general presentation, but I work with a lot of people who have been in domestic violence situations. Sometimes you have to just get the hell out of there as best as you can. Call the cops or something. Right? Make sure that you're not alone. Yeah, and so you can use statements like I'm no longer able to continue. Once you've removed yourself and you've been able to take some time away from this person that made you feel this level of discomfort, you want to perform any self-grounding, any self-soothing skills that you may have already developed. You want to consult with other people who you trust, right? Like maybe calling your mom, be like, Mom, you can't believe what just happened to me. Right? Considering whether you should continue the discussion or have some radical acceptance, which might look like radical acceptance might look like I tried my best and there's nothing else that I can do for right now, or I can't control other people's problems or actions. I can only control my own actions, right? I can't make someone listen to me. I can't force someone to respect me. That's a radical acceptance piece of it. But in some situations, you may have to continue having this conversation, and you want to consider and re-strategize how you're going to approach it next time. Right? Sometimes it might be more helpful to not be alone with the person when you're going to have the discussion again. And you also want to take a look at, in the long run, if I've already done everything that I needed to do in order to communicate effectively, kindly, calmly, then everything I could do, even if I haven't done that perfectly, even if I have made a mistake, if this person has pushed my boundaries and violated my boundaries repeatedly, and I'm now in a dangerous situation, is it really worth it to keep trying? Is it really worth it to keep having any interactions with this person in the future? And so that's that selective piece of the boundary styles that we were talking about. You want to be very selective. There are some times that there are people that are just not going to respect you. And that means you have to get away from them as much as possible and cut any contact that you might have with them. Yeah. I'm looking at you ladies. You know what I mean. Okay. So that's the end of the presentation. I know I had a lot of information in there. Feel free to email me with any questions you might have. I've also provided the phone number for the Gainesville Community Counseling Center and the website. If you're looking for any individual counseling, couples counseling, or family, let me know. I'll be able to help direct you to how you can set up an appointment. Also, if any of you would like more information, I have some handouts and worksheets that I can send you. You can also find them for free at therapistaid.com. You can find them on the boundary styles, the types of boundaries, how to use effective communication, listening skills, all of those things are on Therapist Aid. And I can also direct you if you need me to. All right. Well, I gotta go home. So I'm ending this clip. I hope you have a good day. Thank you for watching. I'll see you around.